favorite guest, Colonel Douglas Macgregor, former senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense and Foreign Policy analyst, and highly decorated combat veteran. Doug, as always, welcome to the show.
Yeah, good to see you, Dan.
Well, let's just start off with this first one here, because President Trump made a very confident sounding statement last night about what he is and is not willing to do with Iran.
Totally obliterate everything, and that's where we were headed. And they wanted to negotiate, and we're doing that, and it seems to be working out quite well.
What makes you think this will be different? Because they tend to never...
It may be and may not be. I think that the threat of this, this was more than a threat. We were ready to go. And, in life, they know when you're ready to go and when you're just bluffing. No, we were ready to go, and we are ready to go. We have to do that.
Yeah, go ahead. He may be right on that last part. People know when you're bluffing. What do you say to that? Because he's claiming with this weird at the beginning of this, I was not bluffing. We were ready to drop the ball on him, and that's working out nicely. That's what's caused him to come back to the table. And then the guy says, well, why do you think they'll be different this time? And he goes, oh, well, it may not work. So which is it? What do you think?
I think I, like a lot of other people, have stopped listening to much of what the president says. You have to look at what he does and forget about whatever he's saying. And unfortunately, in this sense, there is no evidence whatsoever that I can find from anybody who is in a position to know that there are any discussions going on between us and the Iranians. None. So my assumption is nothing's changed. The military buildup continues. And as I understand it, there is a buildup. Additional assets are being brought into the theater. So my assumption is at some point he's going to pull the trigger.
And what do you think, even before we get into what some others are saying here, what happens if he pulls that trigger? I mean, is that going to budge the Iranians loose? Is that going to diminish their missile capacity so that they can't hang on to the Strait of Hormuz? What is that going to do?
Well, I wouldn't expect a great deal to change. You've got to look at this thing from different angles. From the Iranian standpoint, they've captured the strategic high ground. They hold the initiative. We're now in the position of trying to regain it. How do we regain it? The only way to regain it is to attack Iran. How do you attack Iran? Are we going to do something new and different from what we've done in the past? I think that's pretty tough. So what are you going to do? I think you're going to do what you've done before with greater force and greater intensity if you can do it. This is kind of a return to what we call the gambler's fallacy, Dan. Somebody like Trump is a gambler, and he says, I always win. I'm a lucky guy. I always win. I know one more throw and I can win. And I think that's on his mind. Now that he's going to roll the dice again on the assumption that this time, with every B-52, every B-1, every B-2, every aircraft that currently is flyable, with every bomb and munition that we can scrape together that still is precise in some way, all of that will be hurled at Iran. And this time, quote unquote, it's going to work. Now, the other thing that we can't lose sight of is that the people that put him into office are the ones that have been pushing this war. And they want this war to go on. The job now is to utterly destroy Iran. If you can't change the government, if you can't push the population into revolt, and all of that is nonsense, it was never going to happen, then what do? Well, you destroy Iran. And that's where we are.
Well, at least that's where we want to be. We'll find out where we are. Interesting. Well, still, President Trump is still talking like, this attacks or these threat of attacks is going to bring Iran back to the table. And let's look at that. As far as what is your understanding, if there is, if you can divine one, as to what kind of a deal President Trump's even talking about now, because we had a deal. He signed a deal just in June 17th, so less than 2 months ago. That fell apart right away. So what is your understanding of even what kind of deal he's trying to get now?
That's a good question. I don't really know. Remember that it's all about appearing to have won. But even that is not enough, because he's got to go back hat in hand to his bosses, Netanyahu, the Zionist billionaires. And he's got to say, okay, this is what I think I can get. Will this be enough? And I don't think very much is going to be enough for them, short of the total destruction of Iran. Remember, this is a war from the very beginning not about something important to us. We've been down this road so many times, Dan, listened to so many people talk about Iran, listen to all the claims that Iran is evil incarnate and bent on the destruction of everyone, everywhere, all the time. It's all nonsense. It's just not true. We know that. So this is a war for Jewish supremacy in the Middle East and in the region. And it's tied in strange ways back to New York City and the international finance community. And quite frankly, can no longer be viewed separately from Ukraine, because the same people pushing the war against Iran in the Middle East are also pushing war against Russia in Ukraine. So you've got a larger enchilada, if you will, than you started with. So you can't expect some sort of flimsy piece of paper that grants Iran control of the Strait of Hormuz or any significant sovereignty issues, or doesn't eliminate the nuclear capability. Anything that falls short of those things, Dan, is simply not going to be accepted.
But towards what end? I mean, just forget about morality, take that in, or even logic, and take that out the window. But there has to be some kind of mentality behind this idea that, especially those who appear to actually want to merge the two together and to go down a path that any neophyte can see, that the Iran war is not militarily winnable, and yet they are pushing for exactly that. And if they know rationally that they're not going to get a military victory, then what is the advantage to the people pushing this to try anyway?
Well, the government that we're backing in all of this is Israel. What do Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have to say? What are they talking about? They're talking about the systematic removal of the Palestinian population from both the West Bank and Gaza. They would prefer to push them out. If they won't be pushed out, they'll kill them. They've gone into Lebanon with the same basic goal in mind, up to the Litani River at least. And for the moment, that seems to be on hold, but there's nothing settled. So I think the answer is, as you point out, is certainly not rational. And I think Donald Trump is on that train. He's sitting in the locomotive. He may not be actively pulling all the levers or choosing the tracks, but he's on for the ride. And it's do or die in his mind. I think it's do or die in the minds of the Israelis and their backers here in the United States. And anybody who disagrees, of course, is an anti-Semite, a Jew hater, or some other nonsense. But I think it's wearing thin. We had this Grinkevich, the Army general, or I don't know if he's an Army general, Air Force general, who is over in NATO, and he said he's got to make a choice between defending Israel and defending the United States if he doesn't get another destroyer. It sounds a bit over the top, but I think he was trying to make a point on a larger scale. I'm surprised he's still on the job. I think that's where we are. So if you're looking for a rational explanation, you're not going to find it. There's nothing rational anymore.
Just about continuing war. Well, somebody who seems to be in that camp and in that school of thought is General Jack Keane, who here is going to be talking about, you know what? Forget about a deal. I don't want any deal.
I've always been opposed to the deal, even if it was perfect.
Yes.
Let's assume there is a deal here. We cannot do what we did with the memorandum of understanding and remove sanctions immediately.
Right.
No money, no funding, no relief of unfrozen assets, none of that. That has to be kicked down the road, and we have to absolutely see some fundamental change in Iran's behavior.
Yes.
Restriction on ballistic missiles, no support for proxies are the other two major issues here as well. That's not on the table here for this construction. But before we give up money, they should be.
So he is, just flat out. We are saying, let's go back to unconditional surrender. That's exactly what he's describing there. But he's supposed to be General Jack Keane. He's supposed to know that there is no military path, especially with bombs only, especially with our inventories. We'll get to that in a second. He should know that, and yet there he is, emphatically said. I think that, Doug, that he recognizes the same thing you do, that Trump has kind of wavered, so he's trying to push him over the top to don't even have a deal, go back to military strikes.
Well, you got to look at a number of things. First of all, and I mean, because you bring up General Jack Keane on a routine basis, you probably should go into public records and pull up all of his investments, his interests, his income, and so forth, and you'll discover that he's part of the same community that Larry Kudlow lives in New York City. That community is committed to everything that Jack Keane and Larry Kudlow explained. That particular community right now controls the White House and the Hill. So he's really preaching to the choir. Now, to the rest of us in the United States that are not part of that community, we find this irrational and self-defeating. But I think in his view, there's nothing to be gained by becoming rational at this point. Look at the performance of the big five industries in the defense sector. Look where they were in 2022 and where they are today. You're talking about jumps from $22 a share up to $70 a share and higher. My point is that a lot of money is being made by a lot of people, not just in the circle of the White House. We all know how that's been going. We've watched them short oil, and we've watched Trump sort of create a culture of manipulation that allows people to profit from these crises and wars. This is all part of it. So there's no incentive for him to take the position that you and I do. You and I aren't profiting from these things, but they are. And I think that's the simple explanation. Now, Larry Kudlow, of course, is a little different because he's emotionally committed. This is more important to him than anything else. And he's going to sign on for anything that promises the total annihilation of Iran. And literally, that's what these people are talking about. My point is that's not going to happen. It can't be achieved. But that's what they're pushing Donald Trump to do.
You know, it's funny. If Jack Keane is outright saying there, I don't want any deal, let's just require forced surrender. There are others that seem to be a little bit more pragmatic, but maybe a little bit more immoral and unethical as well. Here is Jim Hansen. It's also on Fox News, and he's going to be saying, okay, this is out loud, by the way. Look, let's just tell Iran whatever they want to hear to get us to the midterms, and then we'll bring the hammer down.
President Trump does not want to go into the midterms with chaos in the Middle East, no oil flowing, the markets in response to that. He needs to have Republicans retain control of Congress so that he has freedom of maneuver after the midterms. But that doesn't mean he's going to give them what they want. He can keep them at bay with military force if he needs to, if they're not willing to make a deal. Between now and the midterms, he'll mitigate what damage they can cause to oil prices and our economy, and he'll hope that they will sign some sort of a short-term deal. After the midterms, I wouldn't want to be them.
So, I mean, he is literally saying, look, I know we've lied to them in the past and pretended in negotiations. Let's do it again and then just get to the midterms. And then with no more constraints, then we'll come in with the heavy weapons. How is that going to be received in Iran?
Well, I don't know Hansen, what his background is and what leads him to these conclusions, but there's something we ought to agree on right now, right up front. If Donald Trump ended this war unilaterally on his own and said, this is it, I've gone as far as I can go. It's in the interest of the global economy as well as our own for this war to end. So I'm going to disengage our forces from this war, and began a slow, deliberate, and methodical withdrawal. He would be cheered from coast to coast, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The overwhelming majority of the American electorate wants nothing to do with this war. They don't care about it. They don't want it. They don't care about it. So there's no loss for Donald Trump in that sense politically. So he's dead wrong. In fact, if he ended this flat out, as we just discussed, and got out, I think we'd probably see a different outcome in the midterms. It certainly would be better than it will be at this point. But he doesn't seem to understand that. And that's understandable because he's probably part of that bubble that we were talking about earlier. And you have this minority that has enormous financial power that is in control. They want this war of annihilation waged against Iran. End of discussion, full stop. They're driving it. And Trump owes them enormous gratitude for his position in the White House and his position in politics. And I still think to some extent he must be under some form of duress.
It's interesting that what you say there is maybe more true than some even realize. This past weekend, I was at an event where pollster Rich Barris was speaking, and he and I had a sidebar conversation, and he expressed some of his real frustration because he had recently went to the White House and told President Trump exactly what you just said, that the numbers support what you said profoundly. He said, especially among his base, there is overwhelming support for just ending this war right now and moving on. And they don't care about any of those things. I mean, literally every word you just said was validated by the data and the numbers. And this is a guy that President Trump respects because he's the one that got 2016 right when nearly all the other pollsters got it wrong. And it's puzzling him, and it's puzzling me why he's not making these decisions that are political winners for him, especially heading into the midterms, which makes me worried what you just said there, that maybe he's under duress for some other reason, which I can't divine.
Well, remember Tucker Carlson back in 2023 brought me on his show up at his residence up there in New England. And the first question out of his mouth was, do you think we're on the road to war with Iran? And I unhesitatingly said yes. Now, he subsequently went to the White House a couple of years later, met with President Trump, and then he reported after he'd met with him that Donald Trump fully understood the pitfalls. In other words, the problems with a war against Iran. He understood the risks. He understood the implications, even the ramifications strategically for us. And he left the Oval Office satisfied that the president understood what he was getting into, and he concluded the president would not get into it as a result. Well, he was wrong. And the president knew then and understands now, and he's done it anyway. So I think we have to, it's wrong. People say, well, this man can't be this stupid. He is not a stupid man. Emotionally unbalanced, there are a lot of problems there, but this is not somebody who's stupid. He may not be well read or well versed in the world that we live in overseas beyond our borders. But this man is not stupid. He understands what he started, and he understands what he's doing. So when you look at this and you say, well, then what is going on? You have to reach two conclusions. And I gave you the first one. The first one is, well, I started this. It's the gambler's fallacy. I've got to finish it. One more throw of the dice and I'll win. That's one part. Secondly, people have got something on him, something that is so powerful. He cannot possibly deviate from the path that he's on.
And I guess only time is going to tell us which one of those is. I wonder, because you've got some direct experience with President Trump and rationally coming to a decision and then having somebody change his mind later in 2021, when you were the special advisor to the Secretary of Defense, you came up with what I consider to be a brilliant plan to have gotten all of our troops out of Afghanistan in order in a coordinated manner before the end of his term when he left. And you even went so far as to actually get him to sign an execution order, which was subsequently sabotaged by the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Acting Secretary of Defense afterwards. What did you see in his, because you mentioned that you don't think he's a stupid man, because you walked him through, as I understand, all of the benefits and the cost to potentially doing this. He came to the right conclusion, but then got talked out of it.
Well, I didn't walk him through the details, but he understood that it could be done. He understood, I think, that the winter was the ideal time. You've been in Afghanistan and you know the fighting season over there. The winter was a good time to pull out. But he was talked out of it. He was talked out of it by people in his own administration. That included the Secretary of Defense at the time. It also included Kash Patel, who went over with Mr. Miller, the Secretary of Defense. And they joined hands with Mitch McConnell and several other people from the Hill. And they all said, oh, you can't do this. We've already made commitments. We've talked to allies. We've this and that and everything else. And then he backed down and he said, well, what can I do? If I can't get everybody out, then what can I do? It's the old half pregnancy thing. And that's a political problem. No politician wants to bring the child to full term and then be responsible for it. So he backed down. And I think it was unfortunate. And the result is that what we saw under Biden was terrible. And it could have been avoided. But he backed down. And this is one of the reasons that people accuse him of backing out on a number of different things. But this time around, I don't see any evidence for that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just haven't seen it.
Yeah, well, I keep hoping so. But back to this gambler's fallacy here, trying to roll the dice and get something to happen. We just showed, Hansen and Jack Keane and several others. They don't even want a deal. Well, it turns out there actually is some negotiations going on. It just doesn't include the United States. Here is the deputy Iranian foreign minister talking about the negotiations that are nearing a finalization between them and Oman, with an important caveat.
Significant progress has been made in the talks with Oman, and these advancements are on the verge of being finalized. We were not and are not actually looking to implement Clause 5 of the Memorandum of Understanding right now, because the United States has set aside all its obligations, and we, too, have set aside our obligation regarding the Strait of Hormuz. What we are doing with Oman is a natural path, regardless of whether a Memorandum of Understanding existed or not. I stated that if we want normal conditions to be established in the Strait of Hormuz, it must be through the path of understanding between Iran and Oman, not through the path of imposition and influence.
So the Iranians looked like they've said, you know what, I'm just leaving the U.S. behind. We're going to work on our own deal that's going on here. And then, whereas President Trump is issuing these warnings he did in that first one, Iran is also issuing its own warnings by saying that they warned the Gulf states that any new U.S. strikes on Iran would trigger retaliatory attacks on their oil, power, water, and transportation networks. Reuters reports that Tehran delivered the message through senior diplomatic contacts with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, and Pakistan, urging regional partners to pressure Trump to abandon military action and return to negotiations. And from what we've been able to understand, that's why the last round didn't happen that previous weekend, because Saudi Arabia was the leading voice to say, don't do this because we're going to get hit and there's nothing you can do to stop it. How do you see this dynamic? And what if the whole region comes to some kind of accommodation without us even being involved?
Well, remember what President Trump said when he signed the MOU in Paris at Versailles. He said, I don't want to be Herbert Hoover, and I'm not going to be responsible for a global depression that results. So this is a man who understands the consequences. And what you just showed in that well, I don't know if it was a memorandum or it's just a tweet. What you showed states very clearly what the Iranians have said from the beginning. If you destroy our oil infrastructure, you destroy our power, water, and transportation networks, we will utterly obliterate everything on the other side of the Gulf. In other words, on the western side of the Persian Gulf. Now, I'm one of these people that is unconvinced that any of the little statelets that are on the western side of the Gulf are going to survive this. I don't think people in the United States realize how fragile those states are, how little they can mobilize in terms of military power to defend themselves. Saudi Arabia is viewed, like the UAE, as very duplicitous, as playing all sides to the middle. And so the Iranians, their attitude is these people have screwed us, taken advantage of us, hurt us, harmed us, cooperated with our enemies, the Israelis and others, on a routine basis. So we have no compunction or hesitation whatsoever about destroying them. I think President Trump realizes that, and I'm sure that he has been reluctant to take action. However, Israelis don't care. And their agents in Washington don't care. They could care less. As far as they're concerned, everybody in the region can die if it's going to promote their dominance, their control of the region. I mean, frankly, that's it. All you have to do is listen to the Israeli leadership. They make that abundantly clear. So I think we're back to where we started. President Trump, if he pushes, let's put it this way, there are three doors. Door number one is reopen the war with everything you've got. Door number two is do nothing. And door number three is do a little and then try to negotiate. Well, you've already tried door number one. You're going to go back to door number one? Well, maybe so. Door number two, do nothing. That's not up for consideration. He can't sustain himself politically. Money that is vital to his survival in the White House, to deliver the Congress is at risk. Remember, the hundreds of millions of dollars that are being assembled in various funds to destroy people like Thomas Massie, or for that matter, Marjorie Taylor Greene, or anyone who opposes this war with Iran, that those funds can be applied to destroy Donald Trump. And Donald Trump knows that. Right now, those funds are being committed to his support and defense. Those funds are vital to his survival because they can prevent any impeachment. So doing nothing is a non-starter. What about door number 3? Well, we know that President Netanyahu was furious at President Trump's decision to postpone the attack. And lots of people are saying, well, he's reconsidering. But we also know there are problems with the munitions, and we are waiting for resupply, and we're bringing more aircraft into the theater. So there are other things going on here as well. So my point is, when you look at the 3 doors, you could try door 3 again, but that hasn't been very fruitful. So you're really being pushed back to door number 1, which is all-out war.
And as you say, there's a problem with door number 1 again, aside from the fact that it didn't work the first time, and the target set and the Iranians underground caverns under these granite mountains, that hasn't changed either. But there is something different than the last time we tried door number 1, is that virtually all of our long-range precision missiles, according to reports, are running low, and that's the interceptors, and that's the offensive missiles, et cetera. But this morning, President Trump says, yeah, that's not true. He says the U.S. has massive amounts of munitions, especially of certain types. Additionally, large amounts are being manufactured and shipped to the U.S. as needed. Defense companies are building the largest number of plants and factories in our country's history. The leakers of these treasonous statements are being hunted down. Long-term jail sentences will be sought. So who's true? Is President Trump right, or is the media right?
Well, the media, forget the media. They're saying some things here about the missile stocks, precision-guided munition stocks, that frankly people have been saying for weeks and weeks and weeks. It's not a secret. So I don't know what he's talking about in terms of leakers. What I can tell you is that the defense industry, if you ask somebody at the top of the defense industry, I talked recently to someone who spent much of his life in it. He said, let's understand something, Doug. First of all, there is no declared war. In the absence of a declared war, we haven't mobilized industry. We're expecting industry to behave today the way it behaved in 1944-45 without mobilization. That's the first thing. You've got to essentially move resources, people, capabilities from the private sector into the defense sector. We haven't done it, and we're not going to get the outcome that he wants. And the other thing is that there's a big difference between building missiles and putting together jeeps or tanks. You're not just screwing on lug nuts. You're dealing with assembly lines that are very complex. They involve human beings, not just robotics. There are some robotics, but a lot of it is human intervention to ensure that the microchips, the microcircuitry, and everything else is where it belongs, because these are very expensive. It's use it once, throw it away. If you're going to use it, it has to work. And most of what we produce does have good reliability. Now, we can argue about the air and missile defense. That's a different issue. And a lot of that technology is not new. But if you look at the standard missiles, you look at the strike weapons that we have, those are really state of the art, and they have a very good performance rating. But you can't just produce them, crank them out the way we cranked out Sherman tanks or B-17 bombers. It doesn't work that way. So we got to say those things. And I think Trump, I assume he knows that. And these threats about people leaking, nobody's leaked anything of real significance. I certainly have never seen anything that I thought was classified. But there is such a thing as general knowledge. And people in the armed forces are not stupid. Sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines know what is real and what isn't. They know what they've got and what they don't. And so right now, the percentages, I've heard people say we've got only 20 to 30% of what we need. I've heard people saying only 20 or less. I've heard other people say different things. The point is that we have exhausted our arsenal to a large extent. Are we at risk now of going under in a war with a major power? Not unless we attack somebody and we're stupid. We could, but nobody wants a war with us. And I think probably inwardly President Trump understands that. And I think his view is, well, we're not giving up and we're going to use what we have and build back up later. I suspect that's going on as a conversation.
And what happens, Doug? Let's say that the Jack Keens and like the Tom Cottons and some of these others, they get their way, Netanyahu, and he goes ahead and he does this World War II style deal where he goes out even bigger than the first time. And I mean, just look, from 40 days, we burned through 40 to 60% of some of these categories just by itself. And if we went another, let's say 1 month, we could literally be out of some of these, or at least down to just like fumes in some of these categories. But the likelihood is, almost the certainty is, militarily speaking, we would be in no different position than we are today, except for a bunch of more Iranians would be dead, probably some more Americans would be dead, but we'd be in the same strategic place we are now. What are we going to do then? Because then they won't have the resources to go and fire a bunch more missiles. What are we going to do then?
Well, you and I agree that the high probability is that strategically in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it turns out to be, and we don't know when he's going to pull the trigger, we'll be in the same position we were at the beginning. I think you're right. At that point, there's either nothing left or so little that we can't afford to continue. And of course, we're not even talking about what's happening in the private sector. We're not talking about the market.
Yeah.
You know, Trump has developed this culture of manipulation, which has helped to create the illusion of wealth and prosperity. The market keeps rising and rising, and everybody says this is great. It's back to, 1929 in June. Everything looked the way it does right now. October, things changed radically. But people that say those things are saying, no, you're wrong. No, it's not going to work that way. I keep telling people I'm not an expert, but I listen to people who are. And if you go down the list, you listen to Luke Roman and Jeffrey Gundlach, you listen to Pilkington or Jeff Curie on oil, the situation is not good. It's very, very fragile. It's very dangerous. And what they point to is something that most Americans don't pay any attention to, and that's you go and look at the treasuries and you say, well, the 10-year treasury is at 4.7. All the experts say if it rises to 5%, we're in real trouble. We won't be able to sustain that debt. We can't pay it all. We can't pay the required payment. And at the same time, they say, well, interest rates will fall. When they fall, that's okay. But, right now they're rising. And so that means bonds have to fall. Well, unfortunately, interest rates are rising and the bond yields are rising at the same time. This is sort of a double envelopment for disaster. But all the great men on Wall Street that are friends with Donald Trump are all saying, oh, no, don't worry about that. And remember what Mellon said in June of 1929. He was the Secretary of the Treasury. He was in Besant's job. And he said, we live in an era of unbroken prosperity.
Yeah, and you can see where that 10-year Treasury yield has gone just up since March, when right about the time this war started, and it's continuing on a general trend upward to where we might potentially get to that 5% point you're talking about.
There's another quick example to talk about, and that is our intervention to bail out the yen for the Bank of Japan. And we went into a fund of euros, access to euros that we have. I don't know where that is or how that works, but we pumped great quantities of euros into Japan to rescue the yen. Now have we solved the problem? Have we ended the indebtedness? Is Japan now on the path to prosperity and goodness? No, it's a temporary fix. Why did we use euros instead of dollars? Because the dollar has been weakening against the euro. By using the euros, we potentially weaken the euro and strengthen the dollar. And Besant's very clever. He's an intelligent man, but he's dealing with Band-Aids. He's dealing with quick fixes designed to get you through the quarter.
Yeah.
Or in our case right now, through the next 2, 3, 4 months at most. It's not a fix. It's not an answer. It's not a solution. The solution that makes the most sense, in my judgment, for President Trump and for us, is to get out of the war. Get out of the Gulf. It's over. We're fighting a rear guard action. This whole thing of global military hegemony is over. First of all, we don't need it. It's too expensive. The world doesn't want it. It's time to get out of it.
Indeed it is. But the problem, well, there's many problems, but one of them you actually mentioned earlier in this episode here, I want to go into, and that's the beginning to merge of the war in Russia, Ukraine with the war in the Middle East there. And one of the first, I guess, manifestations of that is in the air war. And here just recently, Kiev has been getting hit relentlessly. I think they did again overnight here. And in the previous night, the previous one, none of the missiles were intercepted at all because there weren't even any Patriot interceptions attempts. Not even that it doesn't succeed very well, but there weren't even any to go up. And this war is starting to turn really problematic. Zelensky's saying, hey, I think I want to be out of this by the end of the year. Well, the only way that's going to happen is if he submits to Russian claims. Although, and this is the weird part again, you talk about people disconnected from reality. You have Zelensky saying, hey, I want to pressure Russia with sanctions, with these long-range strikes. And there was more of those again overnight in Russia, another oil reprocessing facility that was hit. And there's been the wild berries continue to get hit even yesterday. So what is going on with this war here in the minds of Zelensky / the Europeans, or maybe even / the United States here? Because you have Secretary of State Marco Rubio again now all of a sudden saying we're trying to find a resolution to this. These are some pretty amazing shots just from last night. And again, you see nothing is intercepting these missiles when they hit the ground. What do you say?
Well, let's talk about a couple of things. The first thing is it's very obvious that what Putin said a week or so ago is now begun, and that is the intensity of attacks and the commitment to take more territory and advance to the Dnieper. These things are real. He said he was going to do everything in his power to destroy this government, this regime in Kiev. And I think you mentioned to me, I think before the show started, you said someone you'd talked to said it's a ghost town, Kiev, at this point. People I'm talking to that have recently returned from Ukraine have said that it's a zombie state. You know, what you have is the facade of a state. And then you have Europeans and unfortunately Americans helping the Ukrainians with things like long-range drones and long-range missiles to try and create the illusion that there is life left in Ukraine. And unfortunately, we're helping them with the targeting data. We have run all the flights and all the satellite passes. We know where all the refineries are. We're providing that targeting data to the Ukrainians. They're using it. And they have reduced, I think, Russia's refining capacity by about 38%, maybe more by now. This has, of course, created a very grim picture globally of oil. And the interesting thing is that we're actually buying Russian oil on the open market, Dan. Most people don't know that. In other words, we're making the economic picture worse. We're making it more hazardous. Now, Russia is going to survive this. They're repairing those refineries. They've got plenty of oil and they can produce what they need. But it's hurting others in the world that need access to the refined products that Russia was producing. But that doesn't seem to matter to anybody. Anyway, that's number one. Number two is that I think we're seeing now some shakeups in the Russian military command structure. And those are not insignificant. When I say shakeup, it's not a question of firing lots of people and bringing in new people. Some people are new, but most of them are being moved around. And one of the key decisions that was made within the last 72 to 96 hours was to bring in a new general who has been commanding at the front to take over logistics and essentially logistics for the entire Ukrainian theater. And he now has a unified command structure under him, which allows him to reach back anywhere inside Russia to bring forward whatever is required to sustain the accelerated pace of offensive operations. Now, I don't think that major offensive operation has yet really gotten off the ground. We see it in the strikes, but I think we're going to see that now followed up on the ground. That's not an insignificant development. Somebody said, well, why would he do that? And I said, during World War II, this was September of 1944, Bradley visited with Patton in the Third Army. Remember, Bradley was the Army Group commander, and he asked Patton, he said, "I've got a full colonel, fresh out of regimental command of an infantry regiment, great combat record, very successful commander. If I gave him to you, what would you do with him?" And Patton said, "I'd put him in charge of logistics." And Bradley said, "What? You don't want him in action?" He said, "No, I need someone in logistics, a ramrod, someone who will drive that train. I'm not getting everything I need fast enough. We've got to get a combat soldier back there, take it over and make it work." I think that's what we're seeing in Russia. We've also had some changes in the Center Army Group, the Center Army in central Ukraine. It indicates that these axes, operational axes that I've been talking about, I think they are developing. And we'll see where it goes. But it looks like what Ukraine experienced recently, as you point out, what it has virtually no air and missile defense, is going to happen on the ground as well.
And, you know, what's also happening even before we get to the ground, I will look at that in a second. But what do you make of the actions of Zelensky? Because on the one hand, he's talking about, I want this over by the end of the year by putting pressure on Ukraine, by putting pressure on Russia. And of course, he got another sanctions package from European Union, and he's trying to get one on the heels of Lindsey Graham's death. They're trying to use that to get something through that hasn't finished all the way, but they're trying to do that. And then at the same time, they're doing stuff like this. Here in just the last few days, they have assassinated the son-in-law of the Russian Aerospace Force chief, was killed in a Moscow blast. An FPV drone.
Hello, Dan, I lost you.
Having previously assassinated Russian generals from in Moscow, et cetera. Are these kinds of actions going to actually help Ukraine?
No. And in fact, what do we know from experience? What happens when you remove the CEO of a major corporation? Well, you get another CEO. I mean, let's stop kidding ourselves. You know, Charles de Gaulle said the cemeteries are filled with indispensable men. He said that in response to a statement by a French politician, General de Gaulle, "You are indispensable." And he said, "It's ridiculous. No one is indispensable." So no, this is not going to help. It's not going to improve the situation in the least. It's probably going to make it much worse. The Russian population is already enraged. If it was left up to them, I think the entire Ukraine would be a smoking ruin. It's not what people think. So, the other thing is that Zelensky is now effectively become as what's the right word? Deceptive and deceitful as President Trump. Why would you listen to anything that Zelensky says? It's all nonsense. It makes no sense whatsoever.
And one of the things that he's also requesting, while talking about he wants to force Russia into a deal, one of the things he's asking for right now is, hey, how about we have an air ceasefire? And particularly, let's don't target each other's energy infrastructure, and then a halt along the current line of contact, which is almost verbatim what they asked for a couple of years ago, and the European Union was trying to help. But given the fact that this is coming at a time when they're running out of even air defense missiles of any sort, and there's graphic images you just saw a minute ago, what does this tell you about what Zelensky may be recognizing in terms of saying, hey, let's do something, anything to try to get these these missiles stopped?
Well, I think he realizes he's in his last round with Mike Tyson. And if I were in his position and I was fighting Mike Tyson, I would offer Mike Tyson anything he wanted to get out of there. So I think that's what you're witnessing. I mean, the Russians don't take any of this seriously. They have no faith or confidence in anything that we say, and certainly don't believe anything that Zelensky says. Now, there was an article that came out recently. I don't know if you found it. It was I've seen it in Russian. It's also in English now, I think. It was an interview with Zelensky. He was the former ambassador of Ukraine in London, and he was interviewed in Ukraine. And Zelensky was asked about NATO, and he chuckled, and he said, NATO is nothing. NATO's not prepared to fight a war with Russia. He said the notion that NATO can come in and rescue us is absurd. So I think the truth comes out. But if you're in the position that Zelensky is, your job isn't the truth. Your job is to keep the circus running to the bitter end as long as you possibly can to maintain the facade. That's what you're watching.
You know, it's interesting. I don't have the clip handy here, but I saw earlier this morning from Sky News, Sean Bell was talking about some of the stuff about the interceptor missiles and the dearth of them, how long it takes to make them, and how it's going to be too long to affect the current war here to help them out, et cetera. And then he made a really interesting observation at the end where he said, hey, by the way, we don't even have enough in Europe and the UK. We have virtually no air defense. I couldn't believe he actually said that. He said, we have virtually none. So we can't get into a war with Russia because can you imagine if we have this kind of incoming missiles like what you saw with Ukraine and Kiev, it would be the same in our own cities. Do you think that reality is getting through to these warlusters?
No, because I think their view is that we can come out of it quickly, that we can mobilize industry and do whatever we need to do. And I think they don't believe that anyone would dare challenge us. And of course, they're wrong. Now, you do have some general officers, retired ones like Wes Clark, who've said if we lose in Iran, that's the end of our so-called military hegemony, global military hegemony. Well, he's right, except that global military hegemony is gone anyway. Now, the other point that he was making by implication is that if we fail in this theater to be successful militarily, that others will challenge us. I don't think very many people are interested in going to war with us under any circumstances. I just can't find any evidence for it. But I will say this, the longer this goes on, Dan, the worse we look. We don't look very strong. Remember Boris Johnson, who flew in to see Zelensky? This is back in 2022 in April, when there was a so-called agreement reached that would have ended this conflict and on terms infinitely better than anything that could be gotten today. And he was told, you have all of NATO behind you in the United States, the greatest military industrial powers in the world. You can't lose. Well, he's lost.
Yeah. If only we could roll that back and take that deal today would be pretty amazing. Listen, in the last few minutes I got here, I don't want you to get away before we talk about something else that's been in the news here lately, something that you've been interested in for a while, and that is in the dysfunction of the current two-party system. We've talked about it a lot. Last night, Tucker Carlson also talked about it, and he had a long, about an hour and a half long show where he gave you the 10-point plan, basically, for the creation of a new party, because he says here in this, this is actually from MTG, she says the two parties give us the same result no matter who's in charge: more debt, more foreign wars, more unaffordable living. No matter how hard you work, the two parties are total failures. And then Tucker Carlson kind of laid out a vision for where he thinks a new party should go. But there is no party at the moment, but he's saying there needs to be one. Where do you stand on that?
Well, obviously, you and I have talked about this before. I've been an advocate for a new party for a very long time. I think on that tweet that you just showed, Tucker's comment in there was very, very accurate at the bottom. He said, the system has collapsed into paralysis and looting. I think that's what you're seeing. Looting, number one. When I talked about a culture of manipulation in the White House in order to enrich people, it's really corruption and looting. It's not just Republicans. It's everybody that can be involved in it is involved in it. Everybody was talking about Nancy Pelosi and the insider trading involved in her life and how people show up, with a few $100,000 and walk out with millions. This is epidemic now. Will another party rise up and solve it? It certainly would be helpful, but I think it's another question of leadership. Who's on the bench? Go back to 1968 and look at the very serious conditions in our society at that point. Ultimately, the result was Richard Nixon, whom the left loves to hate. But Nixon was elected because he was tough, intelligent, and people had confidence that he would pull the country together and get the job done. You know, he made a profound error with the Watergate nonsense. But if you look at his record while he was there, he did it. He did succeed. He was a very intelligent man, and he was ruthless and tough. He wasn't particularly likable, but he was the sort of personality people were willing to vote into office because they needed someone to get us out of what we were in. That was the Vietnam War and all the domestic problems. So fast forward into the present. We could spend the next hour talking about all the problems we have at home. And where are you going to get someone who stands up and says, forget all this stuff overseas? Doesn't matter. We're bringing the forces home. We have to focus here. We have some tough issues that we must address, however distasteful they may be. I don't think the American people are there yet, but they'll get there. And when they get there, that third party will be relevant. Right now, the third party is a headless monster.
And what do you think that even in that time, because I agree that the conditions are coming that have historically resulted in the rise of other parties, not just in our country, but in other countries throughout time even. And I think that it's clear to come, because I think we have baked in that we can't avoid it at this point. And like you said a minute ago with Scott Bessent, how he's trying to put out little fires here and there to do something to help out in the next couple of months. But the longer term, you're just going to come to a point where you can't fix it. So when that comes, though, what do you think what could we expect, even with the rise of this kind of a leadership that you're talking about? And it exists somewhere, but it has not been manifest yet, because there are great people in our country. But what do you think that the two powers that be, and you can maybe even say the uniparty, what would they both do to try and suppress that? How hard would it be to rise even under those circumstances?
Well, it's always hard to rise to the heights required to do anything of importance, whether it's the military or the civilian sector. People who are really what they appear to be, as opposed to what we see today. We see a lot of people who are pretentious, who are presenting themselves as either men of the people or tough guys or something else, only to be bitterly disappointed. That's what's happened with the whole MAGA movement. Whoever is still in the MAGA movement that thinks that they've got somebody that's interested in them in the White House, of course, it probably needs their head examined. But on the Democratic side, you have a similar problem. You don't have a situation that is conducive to the emergence of anybody yet. Things change when things are bad. And they're bad, but they're not bad enough. You know, go back to our experience at Kasserine in February of 1943. That was a disaster. You had 11,000 German troops that attacked 30,000 Americans in a corps. There were 2,000 Americans killed or wounded. There were a number taken prisoner. The whole corps fell apart. And ultimately, Ernest Harman, Major General that gets very little attention today, intervened, pulled it all together. But we were fortunate because decisions were made at higher levels by the German commanders to call off the attack, when if they had pressed it, they could have driven all the way to the Mediterranean. The whole thing was a catastrophe. Well, that's how you got George Patton in command of the Corps. Nobody liked Patton. Patton was not a likable person. He was a nasty SOB, but he was competent. People knew that he was competent and that he would get the job done. Well, we haven't gotten that far yet, so we're not going to see anybody like that emerge until things get much worse. That's the best I can do for you.
Well, unfortunately, I can't argue with any of that. It's just ironic and perverse that we have to get to that point before people can make a change. But with the people that we have in charge across the board in this country, I just don't see a way to avoid it. We'll wait and see how it's going to work out.